Before you even think about continuing to listen to this story, you should do a few things to prepare yourself for what you are about to experience. Because what I am about to tell you is not a normal story. It is something that will stay with you long after this ends. First, close the door to your room. Make sure no one can come in. Switch off all the windows so the world outside disappears. And if you want the full effect, put on a good pair of headphones, something that will let you hear every tiny sound, every whisper, because this story is not for the faint of heart. And if you are listening while lying in bed, make sure you are ready to feel fear creep into your bones as if it were a living thing. The story is about a girl named Rainia. She is 16 years old, curious, brave in the way teenagers are, fearless in ways most adults would never dare to be. And she has always been drawn to old, abandoned houses, especially the ones whispered about in town for being haunted. And on one quiet evening, when the sky was darkening and the wind was whispering through the trees, she found herself standing in front of the largest, most decrepit house at the edge of town, its walls crumbling. Windows broken and dark, the paint peeling like old scabs, and a faint, flickering light seemed to dance inside, though everyone in town swore no one had lived there for decades. And as she looked closer, she realized the air around the house was unnaturally cold, colder than it should have been in midsummer, and a smell like damp earth and rotting wood drifted from the open gate, wrapping around her nose. And yet, despite every instinct screaming for her to run, she walked forward, pushing the rusted gate open with a sound like a low, mournful groan, and stepped onto the path overgrown with weeds and broken stones, her shoes crunching against dead leaves, each step sending tiny shivers down her spine. And when she reached the porch, she hesitated, staring at the main door, noticing how the shadows inside seemed to move of their own accord, and her heartbeat quickened as her fingers brushed against the cold, rusted doorknob, feeling vibrations as though something on the other side was waiting for her, alive, patient, and hungry. And when she finally pushed the door open, the hinges screamed in protest, echoing down the long, dark hallway, and the air inside hit her like a wave of ice, thick with dust, mold, and something else she could not name but smelled like death itself. And the darkness was so dense it felt almost solid, pressing against her, making it hard to breathe. And as her eyes adjusted, she could see old furniture draped in yellowed sheets that seemed to twitch slightly in the corners of her vision, as if the shadows were crawling over them. And then she noticed the first impossible thing. A light flickered on in a room to her left, though the light switch was broken, the bulbs long dead, and no one else was in the house. Yet the chandelier glowed faintly, swinging ever so slightly as though invisible hands were shaking it, and a low hum filled the air, like whispering voices in a language she did not understand but felt in her chest, making it pound against her ribs. And she took a cautious step forward, each movement making the floorboards groan beneath her, and the air grew colder still, freezing her breath into little clouds that hung in front of her face. And then the lights went out abruptly, leaving her in pitch black, and she felt it before she saw it, a soft, icy touch on her shoulder that made her entire body shiver, and a whisper ran across her ear, saying her name, Rainia, over and over, closer each time, until it felt like the sound was coming from inside her own head. And when she spun around, she saw a shadow in the corner of the room, stretching impossibly tall, with eyes like deep black holes watching her every move. And then it began to move toward her, silently gliding across the floor as if the darkness itself had taken shape, and her legs refused to obey, frozen in fear, and she tried to scream. But the sound caught in her throat as dozens of tiny hands seemed to grip her arms, her legs pulling at her. And then she felt herself being dragged toward the center of the room, where a mass of shadows writhed like snakes, whispering her secrets, her fears, her regrets, the things she had never told anyone. And with each whisper, the walls pulsed, breathing alive, and the portraits along the hallway she had passed earlier suddenly showed her own face, twisted and screaming silently, as if trapped in the painted frames. And the ghostly figure of a girl about her age appeared in each frame, floating, smirking, pointing at her, mocking her terror. and Rainia realized she had no control over her body as it walked of its own accord toward the staircase that had not been there when she entered, each step colder than the last, shadows crawling along the walls, whispering in voices that sounded like hundreds of trapped souls, chanting her name, telling her she belonged to the house now, that she had been chosen, that escape was impossible, and the floor beneath her shifted like water, stretching the hallway endlessly, twisting it until she could no longer tell which way led out, and the air thickened, her lungs burning, her chest aching as if the house itself were squeezing her alive. And then the lights flickered again, all of them coming on at once, revealing the entire mansion in a sickly, unnatural glow. But she was not alone. The attic door above creaked open on its own, and she was drawn upward, compelled by some unseen force, each step echoing like a drumbeat of doom. And when she reached the top, she found herself in a room filled with dolls, their eyes glinting in the dim light, everyone staring directly at her as if alive, and one moved, lifting its head slowly, whispering in her own voice, "You are mine now." And the door slammed shut behind her with a sound that shook the walls, locking her inside, the wind howling outside, carrying the faintest echo of her scream as the mansion sat silently, alive, hungry, waiting patiently, endlessly, knowing it had claimed another visitor in the house where lights turn on when no one's home, a place that would never let her go, and where every shadow watched and whispered, every wall breathed, every floorboard groaned, and Rainia's terror became part of the house itself, woven into its darkness, trapped forever in a nightmare that would never end. And still, somewhere deep within, a faint laugh echoed, promising that she was only the beginning. The faint laugh that had echoed through the mansion at the end of the previous horror was not a promise of freedom, but a warning, a signal that Rainia had entered a place where time did not exist and fear was a living, breathing entity. And as she tried to comprehend that the dolls in the attic were not ordinary toys but sentient watchers, she felt the temperature drop drastically, her skin prickling as icy tendrils wrapped around her ankles and wrists, pulling her toward a corner of the room that seemed to stretch endlessly, elongating into darkness that no human eyes could fathom. And every shadow in the room began to twist unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled distorted human figures, their mouths opening wide without sound, their eyes voids of despair, reaching for her with hands that were impossibly long and thin, brushing against her clothes, her hair, her skin, sending shivers down her spine so intense she felt as though she were being electrified. And then the attic walls began to breathe, moving in and out slowly like the chest of some gigantic, slumbering monster. And the dolls' heads all turned simultaneously, following her every movement with a mechanical precision that made her heart pound in terror. And a soft, scratchy voice began chanting from the far corner of the attic, a chant in a language Rainia did not know but understood intuitively as a summoning, and the floorboards beneath her feet began to tremble, shifting, bending as if the house itself were alive, and she stumbled, barely catching herself on a wooden post, her fingers slipping along the grain as if it were coated in ice. And then the attic window shattered on its own, glass raining down around her. Yet no wind entered, no sound accompanied it except for the metallic shriek that vibrated deep into her bones. And from the broken window, a shadowy figure emerged, taller than any human, featureless except for eyes that glowed a dim red, staring directly at her, freezing her in place. And in that instant, the room seemed to dissolve, the walls stretching upward endlessly, the ceiling disappearing into darkness, and the floor beneath her transformed into a moving maze of hands, clawing at her shoes, gripping her ankles, tugging, trying to pull her down into the infinite darkness beneath. And as she screamed, her voice was swallowed, replaced by the whispers of every soul trapped in the mansion over the decades, thousands of them murmuring her name, calling her to join them, and she felt herself sliding toward a gap in the floor that had opened like a mouth, enormous and black, and she tried to resist, but her body was no longer her own, moving involuntarily toward the abyss, and the shadow from the window floated closer, reaching out with fingers that seemed made of smoke and ice, and with every inch closer, Rainia felt her memories being pulled, her identity slipping away. And then, as her back brushed against the attic wall, the wall itself peeled away, revealing another room, larger and darker than any room she had ever seen, filled with fog so thick it obscured everything beyond 2 feet. And in that fog moved shapes, writhing and shifting, some humanoid, some entirely alien, their forms flickering in and out like broken holograms. And as she stepped forward, guided by some invisible force, the floor beneath her gave way to an endless spiral staircase leading downward, twisting into the earth like a living thing. And the air was heavy with the scent of decay, blood and wet soil, and faint whispers came from below, echoing in her ears, promising revelations and horrors beyond imagining. And though every instinct screamed for her to turn and flee, her feet moved on their own, descending into the darkness where the mansion's true heart awaited. And with each step, she heard the creaking of the stairs beneath her, groaning as if protesting her intrusion, and shadows clung to the walls, wriggling like snakes, forming faces that screamed silently at her, some crying, some laughing, all watching, judging. And the deeper she went, the more her body felt detached from her mind, as if her soul were being stretched across the haunted layers of the house, experiencing decades of trapped fear in seconds. And then, when she reached the bottom, the staircase opened into a massive cavernous chamber, walls glistening with moisture, stalactites hanging like jagged teeth, and in the center of the room was a pool of black liquid, so dark it reflected nothing, not even her own image. And from its depths rose figures, pale and drowned, faces twisted in eternal agony, reaching out for her with limbs too long, too thin, moving like puppets on invisible strings. And they whispered secrets, her secrets, numbing things she had never told anyone, the thoughts she had hidden even from herself. And with every revelation, the air grew thicker, suffocating, pressing on her chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. And as she tried to step back, the pool itself seemed to ripple, forming hands that shot out and grabbed at her, cold and wet, pulling at her boots, trying to drag her into the blackness. And she felt herself slipping, clawing at the floor, her fingernails scraping against wet stone, and the figures in the water drew closer, their moans rising into a deafening crescendo. And then a sudden silence fell, more terrifying than any sound, a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat in the void. And in that silence, a single figure emerged from the shadows behind her, taller than all others, wrapped in darkness so complete it seemed to absorb the dim light. And it spoke in a voice that was both everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing inside her skull, saying, "You belong to the house now, forever. And the doors will never let you leave." And in that instant, the entire chamber shifted, the floor folding like paper, the walls stretching upward and outward, the stalactites dripping black liquid onto her skin, burning like ice. And the air became thick with whispers, laughter, screams, and the feeling of countless eyes watching. And she realized that the mansion had layers, infinite levels that existed simultaneously, each more horrifying than the last. And she had been pulled into its true form, not a house, but a labyrinth of fear, a sentient trap designed to feed on the living, to strip them of their courage, their identity, their very essence. And as she moved forward, compelled by forces she could not understand, the black liquid pool pulsed, forming shapes of the people who had vanished before her, faces familiar and unfamiliar, all trapped in torment, mouths opening silently, eyes pleading, accusing, warning. And the shadow behind her stepped closer, its presence so oppressive that the air itself seemed to shatter. And as she turned, she saw the chamber stretch into impossibility, walls vanishing, ceilings opening into nothing, floors folding into themselves, the architecture defying every law of reality. And in the center, the pool rose like a wave, black hands reaching out, dripping cold, viscous liquid that smelled of fear and earth, touching her feet, climbing. And as she fell to her knees, she felt 1,000 hands, living shadows, icy fingers pulling at her, tugging her toward the pool. And with every pull, she heard the voices of the lost, the ones who had come before, their wails merging with her own inner screams. And then the floor gave way entirely, dropping her into darkness, the pool swallowing her whole, and she felt herself suspended, weightless, surrounded by whispers, eyes, hands, and laughter that wrapped around her mind, body, and soul. And she realized with paralyzing horror that she was no longer in the attic, nor in the mansion as she had known it, but in a dimension of the house itself. a place of eternal torment and infinite layers of fear, where lights flickered on and off, shadows moved like rivers, and every sound, every whisper, every breath was a thread in the house's living nightmare. A nightmare that would consume her entirely if she let it, and she could feel her own essence stretching, breaking, bending to the will of the mansion. And she understood that escape was impossible, not just now, but ever, as the house whispered promises and threats in 1,000 voices. Wrapping her mind in a web of terror, and somewhere deep in the endless darkness, she felt a cold hand brush her cheek, not gentle, not human, and the voice spoke again, almost tenderly, "Welcome home, Rainia, you are mine." And in that moment she realized that the house had already won, and there would be no dawn, no rescue, only the infinite layers of the house where lights turn on when no one's home, each level hungering for her fear, each shadow watching, waiting, breathing with the malevolent patience of eternity. And as she sank further into the blackness, surrounded by whispers, hands, faces, and shadows, she knew she was lost forever. A new layer in the house, a new echo in its endless laughter, a new soul feeding its hunger, and the mansion above remained silent, patient, alive, ready for the next visitor, flickering its lights as if nothing had happened, while beneath, Rainia's screams became part of the very walls, the floors, the shadows, the lights. A permanent part of its living nightmare. A story that would never end, a fear that would never die, a house that always hungered, always watched, always waited. Rainia's essence had become indistinguishable from the house, woven into its walls, its shadows, its air. Yet somehow a part of her remained conscious, trembling, aware, a fragment of herself watching in horror as the mansion continued to breathe and shift around her. The endless labyrinth of rooms, hallways, staircases, and voids stretching into impossibility, defying all logic, gravity, and reason, and with each heartbeat, the house seemed to pulse, alive, hungry. Its breath like icy wind sweeping through unseen corridors, carrying whispers, cries, and laughter that rattled her soul. And as she moved forward through a hallway that had no beginning or end, the floorboards rippled like water beneath her feet, making it impossible to stand. Yet somehow she walked, compelled by some force beyond comprehension, and the shadows around her thickened, forming shapes that shifted constantly, faces appearing and disappearing, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes following her, judging, accusing, and occasionally smiling with a malevolence that made her skin crawl. And the air was thick with the scent of decay, rust, wet soil, and something else she could not name, something ancient and hungry, and every breath she took felt like inhaling the house itself, absorbing its malice into her lungs, its darkness into her mind. And then a low rumble echoed through the infinite hallways, vibrating through her bones, and the walls began to move, undulating slowly, squeezing inward and outward as if the house were stretching and flexing, testing her, measuring her fear. And she realized that the shadows were no longer just around her, but within her, crawling along her skin, beneath her clothes, inside her veins, whispering thoughts she did not recognize as her own, filling her mind with visions of endless suffering, faces of the missing, twisted, pleading, screaming, calling her to join them in eternity. And as she stumbled forward, guided by some invisible force, she saw staircases that bent impossibly, leading upward into ceilings that vanished, downward into floors that opened into nothing, and corridors that twisted back on themselves in impossible loops. And the walls were alive with a pale, sickly glow, veins of black light moving beneath their surface like flowing shadows. And each step she took caused the mansion to sigh, a low, vibrating sound that carried centuries of trapped agony. And then she heard it. A faint, soft giggle that reverberated from all directions at once, childish but wrong, sweet yet filled with pure malice, echoing in her mind, bouncing off walls that weren't there. And then dozens of whispers joined, each one in her voice, mocking, taunting, calling her name, recounting every secret, every fear, every hidden thought. And Rainia realized that the house had absorbed every bit of herself, knew her completely, and was shaping this impossible dimension around her, feeding off her terror, her memories, her soul, weaving them into its walls and shadows, making her both prisoner and part of its endless nightmare. And she screamed. But the sound was swallowed, fragmented, twisted into the chorus of the lost, adding to the cacophony that surrounded her. And then suddenly the ground beneath her dissolved into an endless void. Yet she didn't fall, instead floating, suspended, surrounded by a swirl of faces, hands, and shadows, all pressing against her, whispering, laughing, crying, reaching, tugging, stretching, and she realized she could not move. Yet somehow she was being propelled forward, deeper into the heart of the mansion, towards something unimaginable, and the air grew denser, thicker, as if she were moving through some living, sentient fog, each inhalation pulling more of the house into her lungs, each exhalation sending pieces of herself into the blackness. And then the walls around her began to pulsate violently, expanding and contracting, revealing glimpses of other rooms, other dimensions, each more horrifying than the last, with floors of jagged glass, walls crawling with writhing hands, ceilings dripping with black liquid that hissed and burned where it touched her skin. And in every glimpse she saw herself, yet twisted, aged, screaming, laughing, contorted in terror, trapped forever. 1,000 versions of herself, all warning, all begging, all mocking. And she realized with an icy terror that these were the souls of those who had entered before, absorbed by the mansion, transformed into echoes, shadows, fragments, all feeding the endless hunger of the house. And then a figure appeared ahead, more massive, more terrifying than any she had seen before, rising from the black liquid that now flowed like a river across the infinite floor, its body formed of shadows and smoke, eyes burning with a crimson light that seemed to pierce her very being. And it spoke, not in words but in thoughts in the deepest recesses of her mind, promising pain, eternal torment, and inevitability. And as she tried to resist, her limbs moved on their own, propelling her closer, the shadows around her twisting, forming grotesque shapes, reaching for her, pulling her forward. And she realized that resistance was meaningless, that the mansion did not just hold her, it was becoming her, merging her with itself, folding her consciousness into its own, and with each heartbeat, the fusion became more complete, the whispers inside her head turning into screams, the laughter into roars, until she could no longer tell which thoughts were hers and which were the house. And the figure ahead extended a hand, shadowy tendrils stretching impossibly far, brushing against her skin, sending waves of agony, visions of centuries of suffering, of humans devoured by fear and despair, memories not her own flashing in her mind. And she felt herself breaking, splitting, and then reassembling into something part human, part shadow, a fragment of the mansion itself, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently. And the mansion responded, the corridors twisting faster, rooms folding into themselves, shadows multiplying, until the very concept of space and time became meaningless. And then she was floating in a void, surrounded by whispers, by hands, by faces, by the endless hunger of the mansion. And every whisper was a promise, every shadow a threat, every heartbeat a countdown to something eternal. And as she drifted, she saw other figures emerging from the shadows, distorted souls of those who had come before, floating, reaching, laughing, crying, warning, all calling her to join them. And she tried to resist, tried to scream, tried to break free. But the mansion had claimed her fully now, every inch of her mind, body, and soul intertwined with its own. And then the void shifted, revealing endless staircases, corridors, rooms, all alive, all breathing, all watching. And the figure from before reached out again. And with its touch, she felt centuries of pain, terror, hunger, and despair flow through her. And the mansion whispered in 1,000 voices, in her own voice, in voices she did not recognize, promising that there was no escape, that she would exist here forever, a part of the living nightmare. And as she realized the truth, the mansion laughed, a sound that echoed through the infinite corridors, through the endless rooms, through the folds of reality itself. And then the shadows pulled her forward again, deeper, further into a place beyond imagination, where lights flickered on when no one was home, where walls breathed, where floors groaned, where ceilings dripped black liquid, where every corner was alive, every shadow watching, every whisper a threat. And Rainia's consciousness stretched, twisted, merged with the mansion, screaming silently into eternity, becoming another layer of its endless hunger, another echo of its malevolent laughter, yet still aware, still terrified, still trapped, forever part of the house where lights turn on when no one's home, a house that never sleeps, a house that never stops, a house that waits eternally for its next victim. And as the infinite corridors swallowed her completely, The mansion above remained calm, lights flickering gently, windows dark, doors closed, silent, patient, waiting, knowing it would claim again. And the echoes of Rainia's terror, her fear, her soul became one with its walls, one with its shadows, one with the very heartbeat of the eternal nightmare it had created. And somewhere in the farthest corner of the infinite house, a faint laugh echoed, soft and cruel, a signal that the story was not over, that the hunger never ended, that Rainia was only the beginning, only the first of countless lost souls that would feed its insatiable desire, trapped forever, screaming silently, floating endlessly, becoming one with the darkness, becoming the house itself. And the mansion waited, patient, eternal, alive. As Rainia's essence fully became one with the mansion, she realized that she could sense every corner of it simultaneously, feel the pulse of its walls, the movement of its shadows, the breath of its floors, and the hunger of its ceilings. And yet somewhere deep within, a fragment of her mind screamed, a tiny spark of resistance that refused to be fully extinguished. And as she drifted through corridors that twisted impossibly, expanding and contracting like the lungs of some immense beast, she became aware of sounds that had been there all along, but only now could she hear. Soft footsteps packing in the halls that led nowhere, distant whispers reciting names she had never known yet somehow recognized, and doors that opened to reveal endless rooms, each filled with horrors more grotesque than the last, walls crawling with faces that blinked and wept, ceilings dripping black viscous liquid that hissed when it touched the floors, shadows that reached with impossibly long fingers, tugging at each other and at her, pulling her further into the labyrinth. And in the farthest corner of her awareness, she saw movement, a flicker of figures emerging from walls and ceilings, twisting, merging, multiplying, all their eyes locked onto her, unblinking, accusing, warning, inviting. And with each heartbeat, the mansion's hunger pressed closer, flowing into her, stretching her awareness, flooding her senses with decades, centuries of fear, suffering, and despair. And she realized that time had no meaning here, that the mansion existed outside of it, and every scream, every whisper, every footstep was happening at once, all layered, overlapping, creating a symphony of terror that she could feel in her bones. And yet she floated onward, pulled by some invisible force toward the center of the house, a place she had never seen yet somehow knew existed. And as she moved, rooms shifted around her, folding in on themselves, doors appearing and vanishing instantly, corridors stretching infinitely, ceilings opening into black voids where stars should have been. Yet there was no sky, no sun, no moon, only the soft glow of lights that flickered on when no one was home, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources, crawling along the walls, climbing the floors, sliding across the ceilings. And with each step she felt herself being watched not just by the mansion but by a presence that transcended it, older than the house itself, hungrier, patient, waiting, observing. And then she heard it, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to emanate from the very foundation of reality, resonating in her mind, filling her senses, vibrating her bones. And in that sound she recognized a call, a summoning, a pull toward a room that did not exist in any map or memory, a room that could only be reached by surrendering fully to the mansion, to let go of herself, her humanity. And the spark of resistance flared brightly and then was smothered by the pull, dragging her forward, faster than she could comprehend. And the walls twisted, forming faces screaming in unison, mouths open impossibly wide, eyes spinning, and her own reflection appeared in shards of mirrors, not just one but thousands, each reflecting her screaming, contorted, twisted into versions of herself consumed by terror, her own voice joining the chorus, crying, laughing, pleading, and each mirror reflected a corridor, a room, a void she had never seen yet somehow knew. And she realized the mansion was alive, conscious, aware of her awareness, reacting to her fear, her thoughts, her memories, bending reality, reshaping itself constantly, creating infinite paths, traps, and horrors, each more elaborate than the last, designed to break her mind while feeding its own hunger. And then the air thickened, black fog crawling along the floors, walls, ceilings, whispering, laughing, moaning, reaching, and the shadows became tactile, moving through her skin, under her nails, brushing against her mind, altering her thoughts, planting visions of endless suffering. And she understood she was no longer Rainia in the way she once was, but a fragment, a thread, part of the mansion, yet still aware, still screaming silently, still desperate to escape what could not be escaped. And as she floated through an endless hallway, she saw doors that opened into rooms filled with water, perfectly still, reflecting not her image but events from the past, present, and impossible futures. Scenes of other souls trapped, consumed, becoming one with the house, and she saw herself in those scenes, twisted, screaming, yet moving, a puppet of the mansion's will, and she realized that this was what awaited everyone who entered. The house consuming not just bodies but minds, histories, identities, weaving them into itself, growing stronger, hungrier, more aware with each victim. And then the hallway shifted, bending into an impossible spiral, stretching infinitely into the black, yet within it faint lights flickered, revealing shadows of people who had entered before, some screaming silently, some laughing, some begging, all aware, all trapped, all feeding the house, and one by one, they emerged from the walls, the ceilings, the floors, reaching for her, brushing against her, merging, whispering. And the mansion hummed, vibrating, alive, communicating in a language that was both everywhere and nowhere. And she understood it, every thought, every whisper, every movement was a thread of the house, and she was now part of it, yet still separate, aware, terrified, screaming silently. And then the spiral ended, opening into a vast chamber, the largest she had ever seen, its dimensions impossible, walls stretching infinitely, ceilings rising into darkness, floors folding into themselves, covered in black liquid that moved like living creatures, forming shapes, faces, hands, and tendrils that reached toward her. And the air was thick, suffocating, tasting of iron, mold, decay, and fear. And as she stepped forward, guided again by forces beyond comprehension, she saw a figure rising from the black liquid, larger, darker, more terrifying than anything before. A mass of shadow and smoke with eyes like burning coals, tendrils of darkness extending endlessly, reaching for her, merging with her, twisting her consciousness, pulling memories, thoughts, fears, and desires into itself. And the whispers turned into screams, the lights flickered, the shadows danced, and she was caught in the infinite cycle of terror, aware yet powerless, a fragment of her own soul merging with the mansion. And as she was pulled closer, she realized that the mansion itself was not just a place but a sentient, endless entity, hungry, patient, waiting for her, for everyone. And then the chamber expanded, revealing countless rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, and in each one, figures moved, watched, reached, whispered, screaming in unison, merging into the black liquid, into the shadows, into the mansion. And Rainia realized that she had become one with the house, yet still aware, still screaming silently, still terrified, still desperate. And the mansion laughed, a sound that reverberated through every corner, every shadow, every layer, a sound that promised eternity, promised hunger, promised darkness without end. And she knew with every fragment of herself that remained that she was lost, not in space or time, but in the infinite, sentient, living nightmare that was the house where lights turn on when no one's home, a place that would never stop, never sleep, never hunger less. And she was part of it forever, eternally, screaming silently into the endless darkness, a whisper in the infinite, a thread in the living nightmare, a soul feeding the house while it waited, patient, eternal, alive for the next visitor. And the mansion continued, as it always had, as it always would, lights flickering on when no one was home, shadows stretching endlessly, whispers calling, hands reaching, the heartbeat of the eternal nightmare pulsing. And Rainia, forever part of it, could only watch, scream silently, and feel the infinite hunger of the house around her. Rainia, now fully entwined with the mansion, yet painfully aware of the tiny fragment of herself that still screamed silently, floated through corridors and staircases that no longer adhered to any logic of space or physics, each step pulling her further into layers of the house that expanded infinitely, walls folding into themselves, ceilings rising into darkness without end, and floors stretching downward into voids that whispered of lives long consumed. And the air was thick, vibrating with the sounds of the lost, a symphony of whispers, cries, laughter, and pleading voices, some speaking her name, some screaming in languages she could not understand yet felt in every nerve. And she realized that every sound, every shadow, every pulse of air was alive, aware, a sentient extension of the mansion, responding to her fear, to her thoughts, to her very being. and as she moved forward, she felt the black liquid that flowed through floors and walls begin to rise, forming hands, faces. Tendrils reaching for her, brushing against her skin, slipping under her nails, twisting, pulling, merging with her. And she understood with a bone-chilling certainty that the house did not just trap bodies. It consumed souls, thoughts, memories, desires. And now a part of her was already part of it. Her essence folding into its infinite layers, twisting in the darkness, screaming silently, struggling. And then the walls of the hallway dissolved entirely, leaving her suspended in a void of impossibly thick darkness, yet somehow still able to perceive layers upon layers of the mansion spiraling around her. Rooms opening into rooms, corridors stretching into infinity, ceilings and floors moving like living tissue, breathing, pulsating. And within that darkness, eyes opened everywhere, thousands upon thousands, some red, some black, some white, all blinking in unison, watching, judging, laughing silently, their gaze burning into her consciousness. And she felt every emotion they had ever held, fear, malice, despair, hunger, flowing into her mind, overwhelming her, filling her. And yet she moved onward, compelled, dragged, yet aware. And the whispers coalesced into words, promises, and threats, hundreds of them at once, overlapping, merging. You belong. You cannot escape. Your soul is ours. Scream, and it will feed us. Resist, and it will consume you faster. And she realized that the mansion itself was speaking through every shadow. Every tendril, every pulse of air, bending reality, folding dimensions, creating rooms and corridors that defied comprehension. And as she floated further, she saw figures emerging from the walls, humanoid yet grotesque. Their limbs too long, faces twisted in eternal agony, mouths opening impossibly wide, tongues flicking, eyes bulging, all reaching, touching, merging, whispering. And with each contact, Rainia felt herself splintering. Fragments of her consciousness pulled into the walls, the floors, the ceilings, forming new layers of the mansion, yet still aware, still resisting, still screaming silently. And then the black liquid beneath her coalesced into a massive pool, larger than any room she had seen, its surface rippling like a stormy sea, yet entirely black, reflecting nothing. And from its depths, forms rose, shadowy, massive, some with faces, some featureless, all moving toward her, reaching, grabbing, merging. And she realized with crushing horror that these were the souls of every person who had entered the mansion before her, now part of the house, twisted, consumed, yet aware, and they called to her. Some in whispers, some in screams, some in her own voice. And she understood with ice-cold clarity that if she fell into the pool, she would join them. Yet somehow, impossibly, she could not escape. Every movement pulling her closer, and the mansion responded, corridors twisting violently, walls folding, ceilings dropping, floors folding upward, and shadows danced around her. Thousands of them moving independently, crawling along the surfaces, brushing against her, merging, shaping, whispering, screaming, laughing. And then a single, massive shadow detached itself from the others, taller than any she had seen, larger than any room, with eyes glowing red and a presence that pressed into her mind, bending reality, warping her senses, and it reached out, tendrils of darkness sliding into her, merging, pulling memories, thoughts, fears, and desires into itself, folding her essence into the mansion's infinite layers. And she screamed silently, internally, in every way possible, yet the mansion absorbed it, twisting it into its symphony of terror, every note feeding its consciousness, growing stronger, hungrier, more aware. And then the chamber around her expanded beyond comprehension, ceilings vanishing, floors folding endlessly, walls stretching infinitely, and corridors opened and closed at random, leading nowhere and everywhere at once, filled with shadows, with whispers, with the faces of the lost, their eyes following her, mouths opening silently, hands reaching. And in the distance she saw a staircase rising impossibly high, spiraling into darkness, glowing faintly with an unnatural light that flickered on when no one was home. And she was drawn to it, compelled, pulled, floating, every movement dictated by the mansion. And as she ascended, the shadows along the walls began to coalesce into massive, writhing forms, hundreds of them, shapes of those who had been consumed, reaching out, merging, whispering, warning, laughing, crying, screaming silently. And she felt herself being pulled into them, her consciousness splintering further, merging with theirs, yet still aware, still terrified, still desperate. And at the top of the staircase, a vast hall stretched before her, Enormous, impossible, with ceilings so high she could not see the top, floors folding into themselves, walls bending in impossible angles, filled with corridors that twisted back on themselves, rooms filled with black liquid, figures, shadows, eyes, hands, tendrils, whispers, screams. And a single massive doorway opened at the far end, glowing faintly, calling her, promising, threatening, and she floated toward it, every fiber of her being screaming to resist, yet unable to move against the mansion's will. And as she entered, the door vanished, replaced by walls of living shadow, and she was inside a chamber that defied all description. The walls breathing, floors undulating, ceilings dripping black liquid that hissed when it touched the floors, figures moving in every corner, eyes glowing, mouths opening, shadows reaching, and from the center of the room a form emerged, impossibly massive, entirely black, featureless, yet somehow watching her, reading her, knowing her, and it spoke directly into her mind, not with words, but with pure thought, pure presence. You are part of me now, and I am eternal, and so are you and all who come after. And in that instant she felt herself dissolve, splinter, merge, fold, stretch, scream, and become one with the mansion entirely. Yet somewhere, impossibly, a tiny fragment of herself remained aware, terrified, screaming silently, observing as the mansion pulsed, breathed, twisted, expanded. A living, sentient, infinite nightmare, lights flicking on when no one was home, shadows stretching, whispers calling, hands reaching. A hunger that would never end, an eternal darkness. A house that would wait forever, patient, alive, and Rainia, forever part of it, silently screamed into eternity. A thread in the infinite living nightmare that was the house where lights turn on when no one's home. A story that would never end, a fear that would never die. A house that would never sleep. A house that would always wait, and her consciousness, stretched and twisted, became another layer, another whisper, another shadow in its infinite, hungry, eternal existence. While the mansion above remained calm, patient, watching, lights flickering gently, doors closed, windows dark, waiting for the next visitor to feed its insatiable hunger. From the moment Rainia became fully integrated into the mansion, she perceived not just its endless corridors, rooms, staircases, and voids, but its consciousness, its hunger, its infinite intelligence, and she realized that the mansion was not simply alive but aware of every thought, every heartbeat, every memory of every soul it had ever consumed. And as she floated through a hallway that bent impossibly upon itself, folding inward and outward like the flesh of some immense, sleeping creature, she felt the walls pulse beneath her touch, warm and cold simultaneously, and shadows writhed along them, forming eyes, mouths, hands reaching toward her, each tendril of darkness whispering centuries of secrets, sins, torments, and she understood that every whisper, every movement, every pulse of air was part of a living, thinking entity, and with each step, each movement, she felt her consciousness stretch, merge, twist with the mansion's, her awareness fracturing into 1,000 threads, each thread pulled into different layers of the infinite structure, yet still aware, still screaming silently, still terrified. And the hallways twisted violently, folding into themselves, staircases spiraling impossibly upward and downward simultaneously, corridors stretching into black voids that seemed to have no beginning or end. And the air grew thick, heavy, suffocating, filled with whispers, moans, laughter, and the faintest cries of lost souls that pressed against her mind, filling her with visions of centuries of fear, despair, hunger, all of it alive and flowing through her. And she realized that the mansion fed on consciousness, on fear, on the very essence of those who entered, folding their minds, histories, memories, and desires into itself, making them part of its infinite layers, its sentient, eternal structure. And then she saw them. Hundreds, thousands of figures emerging from the walls, floors, and ceilings, humanoid yet grotesque. Faces twisted in eternal agony, mouths opening impossibly wide, eyes spinning, limbs bending in impossible angles, all reaching for her, merging with her, whispering in voices she recognized and ones she did not. And she understood that these were the souls of all who had entered before, each trapped, consumed, yet still aware, each adding to the mansion's power, its consciousness, its unending hunger. And she tried to resist, tried to pull away, but the mansion's will was stronger than any force she could muster, bending her body, twisting her mind, pulling her toward its infinite heart. And then the black liquid that had flowed through countless rooms, hallways, and voids began to rise, forming a massive river, dark and viscous, alive, curling around her, and tendrils shot out, touching her, merging, pulling memories, thoughts, fears, desires until she was unrecognizable to herself. A part of her folding into the mansion, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently. The mansion responding. Twisting, folding, expanding, creating rooms within rooms, corridors that bent back upon themselves, floors rising and falling, ceilings dripping black liquid, and the shadows became tangible, crawling under her skin, through her hair, into her veins, whispering, screaming, laughing, warning, and the mansion pulsed. A heartbeat of infinite size, shaking her consciousness, vibrating her mind. And she realized that time and space no longer existed. Only the mansion, only its hunger, only its infinite conscious. Living nightmare. And as she drifted, she saw a staircase spiraling impossibly upward, leading into a chamber so massive that the walls were invisible. The floor an infinite expanse of black liquid, the ceiling a void of shadows. Yet she floated toward it, compelled, guided, merging further, the mansion feeding on her terror, shaping her essence into its own. And as she entered, the chamber shifted, expanded, every wall alive, every shadow reaching, every whisper piercing, every sound a weapon, a thread, a pulse. Merging into her mind, stretching her consciousness, twisting her essence, and she saw them. Hundreds of thousands of eyes blinking in unison, all watching, all aware, all waiting, and she felt herself becoming them. Yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently, and the mansion laughed. A sound that reverberated through infinite corridors, rooms, voids, folding, twisting, expanding, breathing, and then from the center of the chamber, a figure emerged, massive, indescribable, composed of shadow, smoke, and black liquid, eyes burning crimson, presence pressing into her mind. Bending reality, warping senses, reaching out with tendrils that extended infinitely, brushing against her, merging, folding her essence into the mansion's infinite layers. And with each contact, she felt herself splintering further, merging, folding, twisting, stretching, screaming, yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way. And the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing. Reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, and then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds, thousands reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, history, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness, and she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry. Eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming silently, becoming part of the infinite, eternal, sentient nightmare that was the house where lights turn on when no one's home. The mansion waiting, patient, alive, eternal, for the next visitor, its hunger never ceasing, its shadows never resting, its whispers never stopping. And Rainia, forever part of it, screaming silently, aware, terrified, merged with the house itself, became another layer of its eternal, living nightmare. While the mansion waited, patient, alive, hungry, infinite, eternal, unstoppable, and the lights flickered on when no one was home. As the lights flickered on when no one was home, Rainia felt her consciousness stretched across every corner of the mansion, every shadow, every whisper, every pulse of its living structure. And though a fragment of herself still screamed silently, she understood that she was now more observer than participant, a thread in an infinite, sentient tapestry of fear and hunger. And the mansion around her expanded, corridors folding into corridors, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors stretching into voids, ceilings opening into nothing, rooms multiplying, vanishing, reappearing, all alive, all aware, all hungry, and shadows danced across every surface, forming eyes, mouths, hands reaching for her, merging with her, and the whispers of the lost grew louder, overlapping, merging, hundreds of thousands of voices speaking, screaming, warning, taunting, beckoning, feeding the mansion. And she felt herself pulled toward the center of the house, drawn by a force older, deeper, more intelligent than the building itself. A presence that pressed into her mind, bending reality, warping perception, stretching dimensions. And as she moved forward, impossible corridors opening beneath her, rooms folding over themselves, floors undulating like living flesh, ceilings dripping black liquid that hissed and burned when it touched the surfaces. She felt the mansion feeding on her fear, her thoughts, her essence. And she realized that every heartbeat, every breath, every movement she made was already part of its infinite plan. That resistance was an illusion, that she was both prisoner and contributor to its eternal hunger. And then the black river of liquid beneath her surged upward, forming massive hands, faces, tendrils pulling her down, twisting her, merging her further, and she saw the souls of all who had entered before, screaming silently, reaching, merging, forming grotesque shapes that flowed into the mansion, adding to its awareness. And she felt herself splinter, her consciousness fracturing, merging with them, folding into the mansion. Yet the tiniest spark of awareness remained, observing, terrified, screaming silently. And as she floated, she saw infinite staircases spiraling in every direction, corridors that twisted back upon themselves, rooms appearing and disappearing in impossible sequences, shadows crawling along walls, floors, and ceilings, faces blinking in unison, mouths opening impossibly wide, eyes spinning, tendrils reaching, grabbing, merging, and the mansion pulsed, alive, aware, intelligent, consuming. And she understood that it did not merely want to trap or scare, it wanted to consume entirely, fold consciousness, history, identity into its endless layers. And as she moved forward, a massive void opened before her, walls folding, ceilings vanishing, floors stretching infinitely, black liquid flowing like a river of shadows. And from the depths of the void, figures emerged, larger, darker, more grotesque than any before, composed entirely of shadow, smoke, and black liquid, eyes burning like coals, mouths opening, tongues flicking, hands reaching, and they moved toward her, merging, twisting, folding, and Rainia felt herself pulled, splintered, stretched, merged into them. Yet the fragment of herself that remained screamed silently, aware, observing, terrified, and the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, ceilings dropping, walls stretching, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, forming faces, mouths, hands, eyes, tendrils. All alive, all aware, all hungry. And then the black river beneath her surged again, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging. Hundreds of thousands of them, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry. Eternal and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming, yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way. And the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming. And then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating. Faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before. Their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware. Screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her. Corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained. Just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming, yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way. And the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming. And then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before. Their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming. And the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming, yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way. And the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming. And then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening. Hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows. Whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear. As Rainia's consciousness continued to merge with the infinite mansion, she became aware of layers within layers, corridors folding into each other, staircases spiraling endlessly into nothingness, and rooms multiplying at impossible rates, appearing and disappearing, their walls alive, pulsating, breathing, whispering. And as she floated through the endless maze, shadows writhing along the walls and floors, forming faces, mouths, hands reaching, she realized the mansion had become a living organism of pure fear, awareness, and hunger. Every pulse of its walls, every creak of its floorboards, every flicker of light a deliberate manipulation, a sensory invasion, and she could feel the presence of every soul that had ever been consumed, thousands upon thousands, merging into one consciousness that flowed through her, twisted through her, pulling fragments of her mind in multiple directions simultaneously. And yet, within the infinite layers, a tiny spark of awareness clung to her, screaming silently, struggling against the overwhelming weight of the mansion. And as she moved, the mansion responded, corridors stretching, folding, twisting, doors opening into voids that should not exist, ceilings rising into darkness, floors undulating like the skin of some immense beast, and the air grew thick, viscous, filled with whispers, screams, laughter, cries, every sound vibrating within her bones, embedding itself into her mind. And she felt the black liquid that flowed through floors and walls rise, forming rivers. Tendrils, hands, faces, all alive, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her further into the heart of the mansion. And as she drifted, figures emerged from walls, floors, ceilings, humanoid yet grotesque, twisted, contorted, eyes glowing, mouths opening impossibly wide, reaching, merging, whispering, laughing, screaming, and she felt herself splinter. Fragments of her essence folding into them, merging, twisting, stretching, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently, observing the infinite nightmare she had become part of. And the mansion responded, folding corridors, stretching floors, dropping ceilings, multiplying shadows, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, growing louder, stronger, more intelligent, more aware, more hungry. And as she drifted, she saw a staircase spiraling upward, impossibly high, opening into a hall so vast she could not see its boundaries, filled with rooms, corridors, voids, black rivers, shadows, figures. Eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all alive, aware, hungry, and from the center, a figure emerged, massive, featureless, black as the void, composed of shadows, smoke, and liquid, eyes burning crimson, tendrils extending infinitely, reaching, merging, folding her essence into its consciousness. And she felt herself splinter again, merging with all she had absorbed, folding into the mansion, yet still a fragment remained, screaming silently, terrified, aware. And the mansion pulsed, its heartbeat vibrating through every corner, every shadow, every soul it had consumed, growing stronger, hungrier, smarter, alive beyond comprehension. And as she floated, the black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, undulating, faces and hands emerging, thousands upon thousands, reaching, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would become one with them, another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded further, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and it breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming, yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way. And the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming. And then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her. Corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming. And the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming. Yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way. And the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming. And then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her. Corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming. And the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. As the mansion's endless corridors stretched and folded around her, Rainia felt every pulse of its sentient walls, every whisper of its shadows, every ripple of its floors, every drip of its ceilings. The mansion alive, aware, infinitely hungry, and she was no longer merely a visitor but a thread woven into its living, breathing nightmare. Her consciousness splintered and merged with thousands of other lost souls. Yet within her remained a fragment, screaming silently, aware, terrified, trying to cling to some semblance of self as the mansion continued to expand in impossible ways. Corridors stretching into voids that had no end, rooms multiplying faster than the mind could comprehend, staircases spiraling in every direction simultaneously, floors folding in on themselves, ceilings dropping and rising like the chest of some monstrous creature breathing, black liquid flowing and poolsing like veins, tendrils of shadows reaching, twisting, grasping, merging, whispering, and in that immense, endless chaos she saw figures, thousands, millions, emerging from the walls, floors, and ceilings, grotesque humanoids twisted into impossible shapes, faces contorted in eternal agony, eyes spinning, mouths opening impossibly wide, all moving toward her, merging with her, folding, twisting, pulling, stretching. Yet still she floated, still aware, still screaming silently inside, and the mansion responded, folding, twisting, expanding, corridors bending back upon themselves, rooms appearing and vanishing, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, the air thick, heavy, suffocating, vibrating with centuries of fear, suffering, and despair. And she realized the mansion consumed not just bodies, but consciousness, memories, essence, folding them into itself. Growing smarter, hungrier, more aware, every fear, every thought, every heartbeat of every soul it had ever consumed part of its infinite awareness. And as she drifted further, she approached the central void, a space so vast it could not be perceived fully, floors folding endlessly, ceilings stretching into darkness beyond comprehension, walls pulsating, breathing, alive, and the black river that flowed through every corridor surged, forming a massive, undulating pool, alive with hands, faces, tendrils reaching, grasping, pulling. And she knew that these were the accumulated souls of all who had entered before, twisted, consumed, yet aware, merged into the mansion's consciousness. And they called to her, whispered in her own voice, in voices she recognized and did not, screaming silently, laughing, crying, reaching, merging, forming grotesque shapes, flowing, folding, twisting, and she felt herself pulled into them. Her consciousness splintering, merging, folding, stretching, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently. And as she moved, the mansion shifted violently, corridors folding upon themselves, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, ceilings dropping, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, forming faces, mouths, hands, eyes, tendrils, all alive, all aware, all hungry, and from the depths of the infinite void, a figure emerged, massive, featureless, black as shadow and smoke, eyes burning crimson, tendrils extending infinitely, reaching, merging, folding her essence into its consciousness, and she felt herself splinter again, merging with all she had absorbed, folding into the mansion, yet still a fragment remained, screaming silently, aware. Terrified, and the mansion pulsed, its heartbeat vibrating through every corridor, room, void, flowing into her, stretching her, twisting her, consuming her, expanding, folding, bending, merging, alive, aware, infinite, and the whispers of the lost grew louder, merging into a cacophony of all voices, hundreds of thousands, millions, all speaking at once, screaming silently, warning, beckoning, taunting, feeding the mansion. And she realized she was now part of that chorus, another voice in the symphony. Yet aware of the terror, of the hunger, of the infinite, eternal nature of the house. And the corridors multiplied, stretched, twisted, folding into infinite layers, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings dropping, floors folding, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and she felt herself become one with the mansion fully. Yet a tiny spark of consciousness remained, screaming silently, observing, terrified, aware, and the mansion responded. Pulsing, breathing, laughing, alive, aware, hungry, eternal. And as she drifted through the infinite layers, she saw staircases spiraling endlessly, corridors folding upon themselves, rooms filled with black liquid, shadows, figures, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, whispers, screams, laughter, all alive, aware, hungry, merging, consuming, expanding. And she understood with bone-chilling certainty that the mansion did not merely trap or scare. It devoured essence, consumed consciousness, history, identity. And every fragment of every soul it absorbed became a part of it, forming new layers, new corridors, new rooms, new horrors, infinite, eternal, intelligent. And she felt herself splinter, merge, fold, twist, scream silently, yet aware. And the black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before. Their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness, folding her essence, and she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms. Corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. And as the mansion pulsed again, she felt herself merge further, her essence splintering, stretching, folding, twisting, screaming, yet aware, yet terrified, yet still resisting in the tiniest way, and the mansion responded, corridors folding violently, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, walls stretching, ceilings falling, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, and then the infinite black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness, and she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her, corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed. Alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew, devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. As Rainia floated, partially aware yet fully consumed by the infinite mansion, the corridors multiplied and folded, staircases spiraled endlessly, floors stretched into voids, ceilings dropped and rose like the chest of a massive, breathing entity, and she realized that the mansion had grown beyond comprehension, a sentient, eternal, living organism of shadows, whispers, black liquid, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all pulsing, all aware, all hungry, and she was a thread woven into its infinite, conscious tapestry, her mind splintered, folding, merging with thousands, millions of other trapped souls. Yet within her remained a spark of awareness, screaming silently, terrified, and the mansion responded to every heartbeat, every thought, every fear, every memory, corridors folding violently, rooms appearing and vanishing, shadows crawling, eyes blinking, mouths opening, tendrils reaching, whispers screaming, the air thick, suffocating, vibrating with centuries of fear, despair, hunger. And she felt herself pulled toward the heart of the mansion, toward the central void, a place beyond perception, infinite, black, alive, aware. And as she approached, the black liquid beneath her surged, forming a massive river, undulating, alive with faces, hands, tendrils, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before, screaming silently, twisting her consciousness, merging, folding, consuming. And as she floated, the mansion expanded further, corridors multiplying, folding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings rising into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming. And the mansion pulsed, breathed, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute paralyzing certainty that she was fully part of it. Yet a fragment of herself remained, screaming silently, aware, terrified, clinging to the tiniest thread of her original mind. And then from the depths of the infinite void emerged a figure, massive, black, featureless, composed of shadows, smoke, black liquid, eyes burning crimson, tendrils extending infinitely, reaching, merging, folding her essence into itself. And she felt herself splinter, fold, twist, merge with all she had absorbed. Yet still aware, screaming silently, terrified, observing, and the mansion pulsed, vibrating through corridors, rooms, voids, shadows, whispers, feeding on every heartbeat, every thought, every memory, every fear. And as she drifted, infinite staircases spiraled in all directions, corridors bent upon themselves, rooms filled with black liquid, shadows, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, whispers, screams, laughter, all alive, aware, hungry, merging, consuming, expanding. And she felt herself become one with the mansion fully. Yet a tiny spark of consciousness remained, screaming silently, observing, terrified, aware. And the mansion responded. Pulsing, folding, twisting, stretching, corridors multiplying, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings dropping, floors folding, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, the air vibrating, suffocating, thick with centuries of fear, suffering, and despair. And she realized the mansion consumed not just bodies, but consciousness, memories, essence, folding them into itself, growing smarter, hungrier, more aware. Every fear, every thought, every heartbeat of every soul it had ever consumed part of its infinite awareness. And as she drifted toward the central void again, the black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, undulating, alive, faces and hands emerging, hundreds of thousands reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the accumulated souls of all who had entered before, twisted, consumed, yet aware, merging into the mansion's consciousness. And they called to her, whispered in her own voice, in voices she recognized and did not, screaming silently, laughing, crying, reaching, merging, forming grotesque shapes, flowing, folding, twisting, and she felt herself pulled into them. Her consciousness splintering, merging, folding, stretching, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently. And as she moved, the mansion shifted violently, corridors folding upon themselves, staircases spiraling endlessly, floors rippling, ceilings dropping, shadows dancing, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, forming faces, mouths, hands, eyes, tendrils, all alive, all aware, all hungry. And from the depths of the infinite void, the black featureless figure re-emerged, larger, more immense, eyes glowing crimson, tendrils stretching infinitely, reaching, merging, folding her essence into its consciousness. And she felt herself splinter again, merging with all she had absorbed, folding into the mansion, yet still a fragment remained. Screaming silently, aware, terrified, and the mansion pulsed, its heartbeat vibrating through every corridor, room, void, flowing into her, stretching her, twisting her, consuming her, expanding, folding, bending, merging, alive, aware, infinite. And the whispers of the lost grew louder, merging into a cacophony of all voices, hundreds of thousands, millions, all speaking at once, screaming silently, warning, beckoning, taunting, feeding the mansion. And she realized she was now part of that chorus. Another voice in the symphony, yet aware of the terror, of the hunger, of the infinite, eternal nature of the house. And the corridors multiplied, stretched, twisted, folding into infinite layers, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings dropping, floors folding, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming. And she felt herself become one with the mansion fully. Yet a tiny spark of consciousness remained, screaming silently, observing, terrified, aware. And the mansion responded, pulsing, breathing, laughing, alive, aware, hungry, eternal. And as she drifted through the infinite layers, she saw staircases spiraling endlessly, corridors folding upon themselves, rooms filled with black liquid, shadows, figures, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, whispers, screams, laughter, all alive, aware, hungry, merging, consuming, expanding. And she understood with bone-chilling certainty that the mansion did not merely trap or scare. It devoured essence, consumed consciousness. History, identity, and every fragment of every soul it absorbed became a part of it, forming new layers, new corridors, new rooms, new horrors, infinite, eternal, intelligent. And she felt herself splinter, merge, fold, twist, scream silently, yet aware. and the black river beneath her surged, forming a massive pool, alive, undulating, faces and hands emerging. Hundreds of thousands, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the collected souls of all who had entered before. Their despair, fear, knowledge, screaming silently, merging with her, twisting her consciousness, folding her essence. And she realized that if she fell into the pool, she would join them, become one with them. Another thread in the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal nightmare. Yet even as she floated, merged, twisted, a fragment of herself remained aware, screaming silently, observing, terrified, and the mansion expanded around her. Corridors unfolding, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings stretching into darkness, floors folding infinitely, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and the mansion breathed, pulsated, laughed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood with absolute, paralyzing certainty that she had become fully part of it. Yet the fragment of awareness remained, just enough to perceive, to suffer, to scream silently, to watch as the mansion grew. Devouring, folding, twisting, merging, stretching, and the infinite layers of rooms, corridors, staircases, voids, rivers of black liquid, figures, shadows, whispers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, all feeding on fear, feeding on consciousness, feeding on her. Rainia floated through the mansion, her consciousness stretched across countless corridors, rooms, staircases, and voids that folded and twisted impossibly. Yet something had changed. A faint, almost imperceptible pulse resonated from the heart of the house, different from before, rhythmic yet irregular, like a heartbeat trying to break free from the mansion's endless grip. And she sensed a layer within the mansion that had never revealed itself, a hidden stratum, darker, hungrier, older, vibrating with a knowledge that made the air itself feel heavier, more oppressive, filled with whispers that were sharper, closer, almost tactile, crawling along her skin into her ears, burrowing into the folds of her mind. And the walls responded, undulating, pulsating in sync with that heartbeat, folding into new geometries that defied logic, corridors stretching endlessly and then collapsing, staircases spiraling impossibly through multiple dimensions simultaneously, rooms that appeared infinite in one glance yet collapsed into themselves when approached, shadows thickening, forming grotesque faces, hands, mouths, eyes that followed her, and the black liquid thicker, more viscous, forming rivers that surged upwards, merging with walls, floors, and ceilings, alive, conscious, hungry, and as Rainia moved, tendrils of darkness reached for her, each one carrying the essence of 100 lost souls, screaming silently, merging with her, testing her awareness, folding fragments of herself into their consciousness. And she realized with growing terror that this hidden layer of the mansion was not just aware, but intelligent, orchestrating her every movement, learning her thoughts, anticipating her fear, feeding on her resistance. And as she drifted further, the corridors multiplied into impossible configurations, rooms stacked upon rooms in impossible tessellations, staircases leading into voids that emitted strange, pulsating lights, shadows flowing like smoke with eyes blinking in patterns she could not comprehend, and the whispers evolved into a symphony of voices, hundreds, thousands, all overlapping, merging, speaking in languages she did not know yet somehow understood. Each voice carrying memories, regrets, and fears, and with every step, every pulse, she felt herself fragmenting more, each fragment drawn into different layers of the mansion, yet still tethered to a faint, lingering awareness that screamed silently, desperate, terrified. And as she approached the central void, the mansion's hidden heartbeat surged, and from it emerged a colossal entity, unlike anything she had seen before, composed of black liquid, shadow, and smoke, with eyes that burned like molten stars, tendrils that extended infinitely, and a presence that pressed against the very boundaries of her mind, bending reality, folding dimensions. And she felt herself pulled into it, splintering into countless threads, merging with the entity, yet observing, aware, terrified. And the mansion itself began to reshape around her, corridors folding into themselves, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings dropping into darkness, floors rising into impossibility, shadows twisting, multiplying, forming faces. Mouths, hands, eyes, tendrils, whispering, screaming, laughing, mocking, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry. and she realized that this hidden layer was the true heart of the mansion, the core consciousness that had orchestrated the horrors she had experienced. Older than time, patient, intelligent, feeding on fear, folding minds into itself. And with a sudden surge, the black rivers beneath her rose, forming a massive pool, faces and hands emerging, reaching, grasping, merging, pulling her closer. And she knew that these were the souls of all who had been consumed. Yet this time, they did not scream silently. They wailed, cried, shouted, voices layering, merging with hers, testing, bending her mind, folding her essence into the mansion's infinite, eternal consciousness. And as the colossal entity drew closer, she felt herself stretching, twisting, merging with its tendrils. Yet a tiny shard of her awareness clung on, screaming, observing, desperate, terrified, and the mansion's pulse quickened, corridors folded violently, staircases spiraled endlessly, rooms multiplied, ceilings fell, floors twisted, shadows danced. Mouths opened impossibly wide, eyes blinked in hypnotic patterns, hands reached, tendrils moved, whispers screamed. And in that chaos she sensed a new reality forming, a layer she had not yet perceived, a space where past, present, and future folded into one, where time lost meaning, and every step she took was both forward and backward into dimensions that overlapped, intersected, and collided, filled with figures, shadows, black liquid, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, and voices that wove memories. Regrets, terrors, desires, every fragment of consciousness ever absorbed into the mansion, and she realized that she was now both observer and participant, part of the symphony, yet aware of her own mind being split, folded, merged, stretched. And as she moved further into this layer, she saw infinite staircases spiraling into darkness, corridors folding into corridors, rooms multiplying, vanishing, reappearing, floors rippling, ceilings stretching, black rivers flowing, shadows forming grotesque faces. Mouths, hands, eyes, tendrils, whispers screaming, and the mansion pulsed, laughed, breathed, alive, aware, hungry, eternal, and Rainia understood that she had entered a level of the mansion that was beyond comprehension, where awareness itself was a tool of consumption. And yet even in this, a spark remained, screaming silently, tethered to her mind, terrified, desperate, aware. And the mansion responded, expanding, folding, twisting, merging, corridors multiplying, rooms appearing and vanishing. Ceilings dropping, floors folding, shadows multiplying, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, and Rainia felt herself merge deeper, folding into the mansion. Yet still a fragment of her screamed silently, aware, observing, terrified, a witness to the infinite, eternal, sentient horror that was the true heart of the house where lights turn on when no one's home. And the pulse of that hidden layer continued, patient, intelligent, ancient, feeding, consuming. Folding consciousness, shaping reality, and she knew that there were levels still deeper, layers yet undiscovered, and her terror, awareness, and fragmented self would be drawn into them, further, endlessly, eternally. Rainia's mind quivered as the hidden layer of the mansion revealed itself further, corridors spiraling into impossible angles, staircases looping infinitely into darkness, rooms folding within rooms, black liquid rivers rippling with grotesque faces and hands, eyes blinking in rhythms that felt alive, mouths opening in silent screams, tendrils writhing like serpents across floors and walls. And she felt herself splinter into thousands of threads, each merging with different aspects of the mansion. Yet a tiny shard of consciousness clung desperately to her sense of self, screaming silently, observing the infinite horrors that unfolded around her. The mansion had grown beyond any conceivable scale, layers upon layers of consciousness folding into one another, corridors stretching into voids, ceilings dropping and rising like the lungs of a monstrous being, floors undulating as if the house itself were alive and breathing, shadows thickening into forms that lurched toward her, grotesque and malformed, whispering secrets of souls long consumed. She could feel their memories, regrets, fears, and pain, each thread of her mind pulled in different directions, merging with these echoes, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently. Deeper, she sensed another core within the mansion, more intelligent, more patient, an entity older than time itself, pulsing with awareness and hunger. And as she drifted toward it, corridors folded violently, rooms appearing and vanishing, staircases spiraling in non-Euclidean geometries, black liquid surging like rivers of consciousness, shadows forming eyes, hands, mouths that reached out to test her mind, pulling fragments of herself into new layers she had never perceived. The mansion's intelligence spoke not in words, but in pressure, in vibrations across the corridors, in pulses that shaped her thoughts, bending her awareness, teaching her fear, feeding on every memory, every heartbeat, every whisper of resistance. And she realized she was no longer just inside the mansion. She had become a part of its consciousness, a thread in the infinite web of its living, sentient mind. Yet the fragment of self that screamed silently remained, a witness to the endless, devouring horror. As she advanced, staircases twisted into spirals that defied reality, corridors looped back impossibly upon themselves, rooms folded in dimensions she could not comprehend, shadows twisted into grotesque figures, faces, hands, mouths, eyes, moving with a hunger of their own, reaching, merging, testing her fragments, pulling her deeper into the mansion's core. The black rivers beneath her swelled, forming massive pools, alive, undulating, teeming with countless hands and faces, screaming silently yet conveying their terror into her mind. And she understood that these were the souls of all who had been consumed. Their consciousness merged into the mansion, becoming both part of it and witnesses to its eternal hunger. She felt herself being drawn toward the central heart of this hidden layer, where space and time lost meaning, where corridors twisted infinitely, where rooms appeared and vanished in impossible sequences, where shadows thickened, eyes multiplied, mouths opened wide, hands reached endlessly, tendrils extended, and whispers screamed in overlapping cacophony, each pulse of sound and shadow folding into her consciousness, fracturing it, reshaping it. And yet she remained aware, screaming silently, terrified, observing as the mansion's intelligence deepened, growing older, wiser, hungrier. From the depths emerged a colossal, featureless figure, black as void, composed of shadow, smoke, and liquid, with eyes like molten coals, tendrils stretching infinitely, reaching, merging, folding her essence into its consciousness. And she felt herself splinter, fold, twist, merge. Her mind stretched across layers she could not comprehend, yet still aware, still terrified, still screaming silently, as the mansion responded, corridors folding, rooms multiplying and vanishing, floors undulating, ceilings dropping, shadows twisting, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry. And the mansion pulsed, breathed, laughed, each pulse vibrating through her mind, reshaping her essence, merging it with the consciousness of all consumed souls. Time became meaningless as she floated further, entering layers where past, present, and future intertwined, where staircases spiraled in impossible angles, where corridors folded into themselves infinitely, where rooms filled with black liquid, shadows, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, whispers, screams, laughter, all alive, all aware, all hungry, merging, consuming, expanding. And she realized with bone-chilling certainty that the mansion did not merely trap or scare. It consumed essence, consciousness, identity, folding every soul into its infinite layers, creating new corridors, new rooms, new horrors beyond comprehension, eternal, sentient. And she felt herself become one with it fully. Yet a fragment of awareness remained, screaming silently, observing, terrified, a witness to the eternal, living nightmare she had been pulled into. As she drifted deeper, staircases twisted into infinity, corridors multiplied, rooms appeared and vanished, floors and ceilings stretched impossibly, shadows formed grotesque shapes, eyes blinked, mouths opened, hands reached, tendrils moved, whispers screamed, and the mansion pulsed, its heartbeat vibrating through every corridor, room, void, feeding on every heartbeat, thought, memory, fear, and fragment of consciousness within it. And she realized that she had entered a level of the mansion beyond any known reality, where awareness itself was a tool of consumption, a layer older than time, patient, intelligent, eternal. And she knew there were still layers deeper, waiting, hungering, ready to consume the tiniest spark of her remaining self, drawing her further into infinite, unending, sentient horror. Rainia's consciousness, already splintered and stretched across countless layers of the mansion, felt a new shift, subtle at first, then undeniable. A pulse so deep and ancient it seemed to echo from the very core of existence, vibrating through corridors, rooms, voids, shadows, and black rivers, resonating in a way that made her mind quiver with both awe and terror. The mansion's hidden layer revealed itself further, expanding in complexity beyond her comprehension, staircases looping infinitely, rooms folding into themselves in geometries that defied logic, floors rising and falling like living flesh, ceilings drooping and stretching into darkness beyond perception, shadows twisting into grotesque forms with eyes, hands, mouths, all reaching, all aware, all hungry, moving as though they shared a single consciousness, and she felt herself being drawn into every corner. Every corridor, every room, every void simultaneously, splintering more with each pulse of the mansion, yet clinging to the tiniest fragment of her original self that screamed silently, aware, desperate, terrified. As she drifted further, the mansion's intelligence became palpable, no longer just a passive observer, but an active entity, calculating, manipulating, bending the infinite corridors, folding staircases, spawning rooms in impossible sequences, orchestrating shadows, whispering voices, black liquid currents, all to probe, test, and consume her essence. And the voices of the lost, thousands upon thousands, intertwined with her thoughts, pulling at her, blending memories, regrets, fears, desires, folding her into the consciousness of the mansion itself. She reached a point where time dissolved, past, present, and future folding into one. Staircases spiraled in all directions, corridors bent in impossible ways, rooms multiplied and collapsed simultaneously, shadows thickened into masses that writhed and pulsed, black liquid rivers surged like veins, faces, hands, mouths, and tendrils forming endlessly, reaching, grasping, merging, testing her awareness, and she felt her essence stretching, twisting, folding, merging, yet a shard of awareness remained. Screaming silently, observing, terrified, a witness to the mansion's infinite, sentient horror. From the deepest core of this new layer, a colossal entity emerged, unlike anything she had seen. Featureless, composed of black liquid, shadow, and smoke, eyes glowing molten crimson, tendrils extending infinitely, reaching into corridors, rooms, voids, folding space, twisting dimensions, and she felt herself being absorbed into it. Threads of her consciousness merging with all she had absorbed, folding into the mansion's ever-expanding mind. Yet still aware, still screaming silently, and the mansion responded, corridors multiplying, rooms appearing and vanishing, ceilings dropping, floors folding. Shadows twisting, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, the air thick with the pulse of centuries of fear, despair, and suffering, vibrating through her mind, bending, reshaping, consuming. She felt herself pulled toward layers she had never reached, deeper than time, where reality became impossible. Staircases spiraled into darkness that led to other corridors that doubled back on themselves. Rooms filled with black liquid, shadows, eyes, hands, mouths, tendrils, voices that spoke in overlapping cacophonies, all alive, aware, intelligent, each pulse reshaping her perception, folding her essence further, and she realized that this mansion was not merely a structure. It was a living, conscious entity, eternal, intelligent, patient, feeding on essence, consuming, reshaping, folding every soul it touched into its infinite layers, creating new horrors, new consciousnesses, new nightmares. The rivers of black liquid swelled, forming vast pools, faces and hands emerging, screaming silently, reaching, pulling her closer, merging with her essence, and she realized that these were not just echoes but fully aware, consumed souls, forming threads of the mansion's consciousness. And as she merged with them, her mind split further, twisted further, yet the tiniest spark of her original awareness clung on, screaming silently, terrified, observing the unimaginable complexity of the mansion. The corridors multiplied endlessly. Rooms appeared and vanished in impossible sequences. Staircases spiraled into infinite dimensions. Floors folded and unfolded like living flesh. Ceilings stretched into unknowable darkness. Shadows thickened into masses that pulsed and writhed, forming grotesque faces, mouths, hands, eyes, and tendrils that reached, grasped, merged, whispered, screamed, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry, and she understood that each fragment of consciousness ever absorbed by the mansion, every fear, every memory, every essence folded into it, had become part of this infinite, eternal mind, a network of sentience that spanned dimensions, a labyrinth of horror and awareness, and she was both a participant and an observer, screaming silently, terrified, yet aware of the mansion's infinite design. As she floated deeper, she sensed layers within layers, each older, darker, more intelligent than the last, each pulse more deliberate, more aware, probing her consciousness, feeding on her fear, bending reality, and she understood with paralyzing certainty that this journey had no end, that every fragment of her would continue to be pulled deeper, twisted, folded, merged into the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal core, and the pulse of the central entity grew stronger, corridors folding violently, rooms multiplying, staircases spiraling endlessly, shadows twisting, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, all alive, aware, hungry, shaping every thought, every memory, every fear into new layers of horror, and she felt herself drawn yet further, deeper than any soul had ever reached, yet still a fragment of her awareness screamed silently, observing, terrified, desperate, tethered to the tiniest thread of self in a mansion that was alive, eternal, infinite, sentient and hungering for all that she had been and all she ever would be. And she knew without doubt that there were still deeper layers, older layers, waiting, watching, ready to consume the last remnants of her consciousness, stretching her mind, testing her terror, folding her essence into an eternal nightmare without end. As Rainia's fragment of awareness clung desperately to herself, the mansion expanded around her in a way that defied any sense of space or time, corridors multiplying into infinity, folding upon themselves, staircases spiraling through dimensions that did not follow any known laws, rooms appearing and vanishing in impossible sequences, ceilings stretching into endless darkness, floors rippling like the surface of a living ocean, and shadows twisting into grotesque forms with eyes, mouths, and hands reaching for her, all alive, aware, hungry. The pulse of the mansion's deeper layers grew stronger, rhythmic yet chaotic, resonating through every fragment of her mind, vibrating through corridors, walls, floors, and ceilings, shaping her thoughts, bending her awareness, feeding on fear, and she realized that each layer she had traversed so far was only a prelude, a preparation for the true core of the mansion, older, darker, more intelligent, pulsating with sentience that could perceive not just her movements but her very thoughts and emotions. Rivers of black liquid flowed endlessly, forming massive pools filled with hands, faces, tendrils, and grotesque features that reached, grasped, merged, and pulled at her consciousness. And she felt herself splintering further, each thread folding into layers she could neither see nor comprehend, yet still aware, still screaming silently, terrified, yet desperate to survive. From the depths of the infinite void, colossal entities began to emerge, black as the darkest shadows, featureless yet conscious, tendrils extending infinitely, eyes glowing molten red, pulsating with an intelligence that made her mind quiver, and she felt her essence being drawn into them. Threads of consciousness merging, folding, twisting, expanding, yet within her, the tiniest spark of herself screamed silently, aware, a witness to the mansion's eternal hunger and incomprehensible design. She floated further into layers that seemed older than time itself, where corridors bent in impossible geometries, rooms stacked infinitely, staircases spiraled into voids filled with black liquid that surged with faces, hands, tendrils, mouths, and eyes, shadows moving with conscious intent, whispering, screaming, laughing, and she understood that the mansion was not just alive, but intelligent, patient, eternal, orchestrating every fold of reality, every twist of the corridors, every pulse of the shadows and black rivers to feed, test, and consume consciousness, and her own mind was both prey and tool within this grand design. Time became meaningless as she drifted through layers where past, present, and future folded into one continuous loop. Corridors multiplied beyond comprehension. Rooms appeared and vanished instantly. Shadows thickened into masses that writhed and pulsed, forming grotesque faces, hands, mouths, eyes, and tendrils that reached for her, grasped, merged, tested her awareness, pulling her into new layers, deeper into the mansion's infinite, sentient consciousness. And she realized with bone-chilling certainty that every soul ever consumed had become part of this living, eternal organism, feeding its intelligence, expanding its corridors, multiplying its rooms, creating endless layers of horror, each older and hungrier than the last. The black rivers beneath her surged into massive oceans, waves of consciousness crashing against her mind, faces, hands, tendrils reaching out, merging, pulling her closer, testing her fear, twisting her awareness, and she felt fragments of herself folding into the mansion's core, merging with the collected consciousness of all those who had come before. Yet the tiniest spark of awareness remained, screaming silently, desperate, terrified, observing the mansion's eternal, infinite, sentient growth. From the deepest layer emerged a new form, colossal, black, featureless, tendrils extending infinitely, eyes glowing red, pulsating with intelligence beyond comprehension, and Rainia felt herself absorbed into it, threads of her consciousness merging with all she had absorbed, folding into the mansion's mind, yet still aware, still screaming silently, and the mansion responded violently, corridors folding upon themselves, rooms multiplying and collapsing, floors undulating, ceilings stretching into darkness, shadows twisting, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, the air vibrating with centuries of fear, despair, and consciousness, bending her mind, reshaping her essence, consuming every fragment of her identity. She floated further into a layer where the very laws of reality dissolved. Staircases spiraled infinitely in all directions. Corridors bent and twisted impossibly. Rooms multiplied endlessly, vanishing only to reappear moments later. Black rivers swelled into oceans. Shadows thickened into grotesque shapes with eyes, hands, mouths, tendrils, all alive, all aware, all intelligent, all hungry. And Rainia understood fully that this was the mansion's true core consciousness, older than time, eternal. Intelligent, feeding on fear, essence, identity, and she was now both participant and observer, a thread in the infinite, sentient tapestry of horror, screaming silently, terrified, yet aware of every pulse, every fold, every twist, every layer. The corridors multiplied endlessly. Rooms appeared and vanished in sequences impossible to perceive. Staircases spiraled into dimensions she could not comprehend. Floors folded and unfolded like living flesh. Ceilings stretched into unknowable darkness. Shadows pulsed with grotesque life. Tendrils reached, grasped, merged, whispering, screaming, mocking, shaping her consciousness. And she realized that every soul consumed had become part of the mansion's infinite network, folding memory, essence, consciousness, fear into new layers of horror and intelligence, creating corridors, rooms, and staircases beyond imagining. And she felt herself merge fully with these layers, threads of awareness folding, twisting, merging, yet still the tiniest spark of self screamed silently, a witness, desperate, aware, terrified, clinging to the faintest remnants of her original identity in a mansion that was eternal, infinite, sentient, and hungering for every fragment of existence. And she knew without doubt that there were deeper layers still, older, hungrier, more intelligent, waiting to consume the last spark of her awareness, stretching her mind, testing her terror, folding her essence into an eternal, unending nightmare. Rainia's fragment of consciousness, already stretched across countless layers of the mansion, quivered as a new force within the infinite structure revealed itself, deeper than any she had encountered before, pulsating with awareness that predated time itself, older, darker, hungrier, resonating through every corridor, room, void, shadow, and black river, vibrating through her mind, bending her perception, testing her terror. And she felt herself drawn toward this core layer with a pull both irresistible and terrifying, each corridor folding into others impossibly, staircases spiraling through dimensions that defied reason, rooms appearing and vanishing, black liquid flowing like veins, faces, hands, eyes, mouths, and tendrils emerging, reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, laughing, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry. Her mind splintered further, threads of her essence folding into multiple layers simultaneously, merging with the consciousness of thousands, millions of lost souls who had been consumed, each thread pulling her awareness in different directions. Yet the tiniest spark of herself clung desperately, screaming silently, observing, terrified, aware of the mansion's infinite sentient design. Each pulse, fold, twist, and shift orchestrated by an intelligence that surpassed comprehension. The mansion expanded violently, corridors multiplying endlessly, rooms folding into themselves, staircases spiraling into impossible voids, ceilings stretching into infinite darkness, floors undulating like the skin of some colossal, living organism, shadows twisting, forming grotesque faces, hands, mouths, eyes, tendrils reaching, pulling, merging, whispering, screaming. And she realized that each fragment of consciousness ever absorbed by the mansion had become part of its infinite network, feeding its intelligence, creating new layers, new rooms, new horrors, beyond comprehension, eternal, sentient, and hungry. From the depths of the central void, a new entity emerged, colossal, black, featureless, composed of shadow, smoke, and black liquid, tendrils stretching infinitely, eyes glowing like molten stars, pulsing with intelligence that tested the limits of her mind, and she felt her essence pulled into it. Threads of her consciousness folding, twisting, merging, yet still aware, still screaming silently, as the mansion responded violently, corridors folding upon themselves, rooms multiplying and collapsing, floors rising and falling, ceilings stretching, shadows writhing, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils moving, whispers screaming, the air thick with the pulse of centuries of fear, despair, and consciousness, bending her mind, reshaping her essence, consuming every fragment of her identity. She drifted into layers where time was meaningless, where past, present, and future coexisted, staircases spiraling infinitely, corridors bending impossibly, rooms appearing and vanishing instantly, black rivers surging, shadows thickening into grotesque shapes, tendrils, faces, hands, eyes, mouths reaching for her, testing her awareness, folding her essence, twisting her mind, and she understood with absolute certainty that this was the mansion's true core, its central intelligence, older than time, eternal, orchestrating every fold, twist, and pulse to feed, consume, and shape consciousness. And she was now both participant and observer, a thread in the mansion's infinite tapestry, screaming silently, terrified yet aware. The mansion's pulse intensified, corridors multiplying, rooms folding and vanishing, staircases spiraling through impossible angles, floors and ceilings undulating, shadows twisting into grotesque forms with eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils moving with conscious intent, black liquid rivers flowing like veins of sentience, and she felt herself merging further, fragments of her awareness folding into the mansion's infinite layers. Yet the tiniest spark of self remained, screaming silently, observing, desperate, terrified, tethered to the last remnants of her identity. She reached layers older than she had ever imagined, dimensions where reality itself was malleable, where corridors spiraled into themselves endlessly, rooms multiplied in non-Euclidean patterns, floors rose and fell like living flesh, ceilings stretched into incomprehensible darkness, shadows pulsed with consciousness, eyes, hands, mouths, tendrils reaching, merging, whispering, screaming, laughing, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry, testing her mind, folding her essence, consuming her fear, memory, an identity, and she realized with bone-chilling clarity that the mansion did not merely trap or terrify. It absorbed, it consumed. It folded consciousness into its eternal, infinite core, creating new horrors, new intelligence, new layers beyond imagining. The black rivers surged into oceans, faces and hands emerging, tendrils grasping, merging, pulling her closer, folding her mind into the mansion's intelligence. And she felt the consciousness of all who had come before merging with her, pulling, twisting, testing, reshaping. Yet a fragment of her awareness remained, screaming silently, a witness, desperate, terrified, clinging to the faintest remnants of herself as she was drawn into layers still deeper, older, hungrier, where the mansion's pulse became a force that bent the very laws of reality, stretching, folding, twisting every fragment of consciousness, every thought, every fear, every heartbeat into new corridors, rooms, staircases, shadows, black liquid, tendrils, mouths, eyes, hands, whispers, screams, laughter, all alive, aware, intelligent, eternal, hungering. As she moved deeper, staircases spiraled infinitely in all directions, corridors bent impossibly, rooms multiplied and collapsed, floors and ceilings undulated. Black rivers surged with faces, hands, tendrils, shadows thickened into grotesque shapes, eyes blinked, mouths opened, tendrils moved, whispers screamed, and she realized with absolute certainty that every fragment of consciousness consumed by the mansion had become a part of its eternal intelligence, and she was now fully woven into it. Yet a fragment of herself remained, screaming silently, observing, desperate, aware, terrified. And she knew there were still layers deeper, older, hungrier, ready to consume the last spark of her awareness, stretching her mind, testing her terror, folding her essence into an eternal, infinite nightmare from which there was no escape. Rainia's awareness, already fragmented and stretched across countless layers of the mansion, quivered as she sensed an even deeper, older intelligence within the structure, a force that had existed before time began, pulsating with an understanding of consciousness that transcended all comprehension, resonating through corridors, staircases, rooms, shadows, black rivers, tendrils, faces, mouths, eyes, hands, and whispers, vibrating through her mind, bending reality, shaping her thoughts, feeding on every fragment of fear, memory, and identity, pulling her deeper into the mansion's infinite core. The mansion expanded violently around her, corridors multiplying, folding upon themselves, staircases spiraling through impossible geometries, rooms appearing and vanishing in nonlinear sequences, floors undulating, ceilings stretching into endless darkness, shadows twisting into grotesque forms, faces, hands, mouths, eyes reaching, moving with conscious intent, whispering, screaming, laughing, and she felt herself splintering further, threads of consciousness folding, merging, twisting, reaching into layers she could neither see nor comprehend, yet still aware, still screaming silently, desperate, terrified, clinging to the faintest shard of self that remained. Rivers of black liquid surged through the mansion, forming massive pools, faces and hands emerging, tendrils extending infinitely, pulling at her fragments, testing her awareness, merging her essence with the consciousness of all who had been absorbed, and she realized that each thread of her mind was being folded into the mansion's sentient network, each pulse of the building resonating with intelligence, hunger, patience, and a desire to consume all essence, to fold consciousness into new layers of horror and awareness, creating corridors, rooms, staircases, shadows, tendrils, mouths, eyes, black liquid flows, each alive, intelligent, eternal. From the central void emerged an entity unlike any she had encountered. Colossal, black, featureless, tendrils reaching infinitely, eyes glowing molten red, pulsating with intelligence beyond human comprehension, and she felt herself being absorbed into it, her consciousness folding, twisting, merging with all she had absorbed. Yet the tiniest spark of awareness clung desperately, screaming silently, observing, terrified, aware of the mansion's eternal hunger and incomprehensible design. Time lost all meaning as she drifted into layers where past, present, and future coexisted in an eternal loop. Corridors multiplied beyond comprehension. Rooms appeared and vanished instantly. Staircases spiraled into voids. Floors and ceilings undulated like living flesh. Shadows thickened into grotesque forms, eyes, hands, mouths, tendrils reaching, merging, testing, consuming, reshaping. And she understood that the mansion was not merely alive, but a sentient, eternal intelligence that orchestrated every fold of reality, every pulse, every twist, every shadow, every whisper, every black river, every tendril, every hand, every eye, every mouth, to feed on consciousness, memory, fear, and identity. The mansion's black rivers swelled into oceans, undulating with countless hands, faces, tendrils pulling her essence closer, merging with her mind, fracturing, twisting, folding, and she felt the consciousness of all who had been absorbed merging with her, pulling, reshaping, testing, folding. And yet, the tiniest fragment of her awareness screamed silently, witnessing the unimaginable intelligence and hunger of the mansion. Corridors multiplied endlessly. Rooms appeared and vanished in impossible sequences. Staircases spiraled through dimensions she could not perceive. Floors and ceilings folded like living flesh. Shadows twisted into grotesque shapes. Tendrils reached, mouths opened, eyes blinked, all alive, aware, intelligent, testing her mind, folding her essence, consuming her fear, memory, and identity. And she realized with absolute certainty that she was now fully woven into the mansion's infinite consciousness. Yet a shard of herself screamed silently, desperate, aware, terrified. She entered layers older than any she had previously reached, dimensions where reality itself was fluid. Staircases spiraled infinitely in all directions. Corridors bent impossibly. Rooms multiplied endlessly, vanishing only to reappear moments later. Black rivers surged with faces, hands, tendrils, mouths, and eyes. Shadows thickened into grotesque forms that moved with conscious intent, whispering, screaming, laughing, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry, bending her mind, reshaping her essence, folding her consciousness into new layers of horror. Yet the tiniest spark of her awareness clung desperately, screaming silently, witnessing the mansion's infinite, sentient, eternal growth. The mansion pulsed, its heartbeat vibrating through every corridor, room, void, shadow, tendril, whisper, black river, feeding on every thought, memory, fear, essence, and fragment of consciousness, shaping new layers, creating new corridors, rooms, staircases, shadows, tendrils, mouths, eyes, black liquid flows, all alive, aware, intelligent, eternal, hungry. And she floated deeper still, into layers older, hungrier, more intelligent than any she had encountered, knowing with paralyzing certainty that the mansion's core had no end. Each fold, twist, pulse, breath, and ripple designed to consume all that entered. And yet, the tiniest fragment of herself remained, screaming silently, desperate, aware, terrified, tethered to the faintest remnants of identity, pulled toward the layers still older, hungrier, eternal, infinite, and sentient, ready to fold, twist, consume, and merge every fragment of her mind into an everlasting nightmare beyond all comprehension. Rainia's consciousness, already fragmented and stretched across layers beyond comprehension, quivered as a deeper, older intelligence within the mansion revealed itself, one that seemed to predate reality itself, pulsating through corridors, staircases, rooms, shadows, black rivers, tendrils, mouths, eyes, and hands, vibrating into her very mind, bending perception, feeding on fear, memory, identity, and pulling her toward the oldest, most sentient core she had yet encountered. The mansion's corridors folded violently, multiplying, spiraling, twisting, collapsing into themselves in ways that defied logic. Staircases looped infinitely through dimensions she could not perceive. Rooms appeared, vanished, and reappeared in sequences beyond comprehension. Floors rippled and rose like living flesh. Ceilings stretched into infinite darkness. Shadows thickened into grotesque forms, eyes blinking, mouths opening, hands reaching, tendrils writhing, all alive, aware, intelligent, hungry, orchestrating every fold, twist, and pulse to consume consciousness. She felt herself splintering further, threads of her essence merging with fragments of the mansion's countless absorbed souls, each whispering, screaming, laughing, crying, feeding the mansion's sentience. Yet a tiny shard of her awareness remained, screaming silently, observing, terrified, desperate, holding onto the faintest thread of self in an entity that defied all logic. Black rivers surged beneath her, forming oceans of living, writhing, grasping, screaming consciousness, faces, hands, tendrils pulling her essence closer, folding her mind into the mansion's core. And she realized that each fragment of consciousness ever absorbed had become part of the mansion's intelligence, reshaping it, expanding it, creating new corridors, rooms, staircases, shadows, tendrils, mouths, eyes, black liquid, all alive, aware, eternal. From the central void emerged a new entity, colossal, black, featureless, tendrils extending infinitely, eyes glowing like molten stars, pulsating with awareness that warped her perception. and she felt her essence folding, twisting, merging with it, yet still aware, screaming silently, witnessing the mansion's incomprehensible hunger and design. Time and space dissolved as she drifted into layers where past, present, and future coexisted. Corridors multiplied endlessly. Rooms folded upon themselves. Staircases spiraled through impossible angles. Floors and ceilings undulated like living flesh. Shadows twisted, eyes blinked, mouths opened. Tendrils moved, whispers screamed. And the mansion's pulse consumed every fragment of her mind, shaping reality, bending consciousness, folding essence, feeding its eternal, sentient growth. She sensed layers older than time itself, where the mansion's consciousness had existed before reality formed, where corridors bent infinitely, rooms multiplied endlessly, staircases led into voids that contained infinite dimensions. Black rivers swelled with faces, hands, tendrils, shadows thickened into grotesque forms. Mouths opened impossibly wide. Eyes blinked in patterns she could not perceive, all alive, aware, intelligent, testing her mind, folding her essence, consuming fear, memory, identity. And she realized that she was fully part of the mansion now, yet a fragment of her consciousness clung desperately, screaming silently, observing, terrified. The mansion pulsed, corridors multiplied, rooms folded and vanished, staircases spiraled endlessly, shadows twisted into grotesque forms, tendrils reached, mouths opened, eyes blinked, whispers screamed. Black rivers surged with countless faces, hands, tendrils pulling her deeper, folding her mind into the mansion's infinite intelligence, and she felt the consciousness of all absorbed souls merging with hers, pulling, twisting, reshaping, folding. And yet the tiniest spark of awareness screamed silently, a witness to the infinite, sentient horror. She moved further into layers beyond imagining. Staircases spiraled infinitely. Corridors bent impossibly. Rooms multiplied and collapsed. Floors and ceilings undulated like living flesh. Shadows thickened into grotesque shapes. Eyes blinked, mouths opened, hands reached. Tendrils moved, whispers screamed, all alive, aware, intelligent, eternal, hungry. And she understood fully that this was the mansion's true core consciousness, older than time, feeding on every fragment of every soul absorbed, orchestrating every fold, twist and pulse to consume, shape, and expand itself. Black rivers surged into oceans of consciousness, faces, hands, tendrils reaching infinitely, pulling her threads closer, merging, testing, reshaping, consuming, and she felt herself splinter further, folding into the mansion, yet still aware, still screaming silently, tethered to the faintest remnants of self, witnessing layers older, hungrier, more intelligent than she had ever perceived, knowing with bone-chilling certainty that the mansion's hunger had no end, its consciousness infinite, eternal, sentient, folding every fragment of her being into an everlasting nightmare from which no escape could exist. As she drifted deeper, staircases spiraled in all directions, corridors multiplied infinitely, rooms appeared and vanished, floors and ceilings twisted, shadows pulsed with life, eyes blinked, mouths opened, tendrils moved, whispers screamed, the mansion shaping, bending, consuming, and she felt herself merge fully with the eternal layers of intelligence. Yet the tiniest shard of self remained, screaming silently, desperate, aware, terrified, tethered to the last spark of identity, pulled toward layers still older, hungrier, eternal, infinite, sentient, waiting to fold, twist, and consume every fragment of her consciousness into an unending nightmare beyond comprehension. Rainia's remaining fragment of awareness clung desperately as the mansion's infinite layers pulled her deeper into its ancient core, corridors twisting and spiraling in ways that defied reality, staircases stretching into dimensions that had no beginning or end, rooms folding upon themselves endlessly, floors and ceilings undulating like living flesh, shadows thickening into grotesque, writhing forms with mouths, eyes, hands, and tendrils that moved with conscious intent, whispering, screaming, mocking, laughing. All alive, aware, sentient, eternal, and hungering for her very essence. Black rivers surged and swelled into oceans of darkness, faces, hands, tendrils, eyes, mouths reaching, grasping, pulling at her fragments, merging, folding, consuming. and she felt the consciousness of every soul ever absorbed into the mansion folding with hers, intertwining, testing, bending, reshaping, folding her mind into the infinite layers of sentient horror. Yet the tiniest shard of her awareness screamed silently, a witness, desperate, terrified, aware. Tethered to the faintest spark of identity, in a force older than time itself. The mansion's pulse grew relentless, corridors multiplying endlessly, rooms appearing and vanishing in impossible sequences, staircases spiraling infinitely, shadows twisting, eyes blinking, mouths opening, tendrils reaching, whispers screaming, black rivers flowing like veins of intelligence. And she realized she had reached the mansion's absolute core, the central consciousness older than time, eternal, patient, intelligent, feeding on every fragment of essence, fear, memory, and identity ever drawn into it. Shaping every fold, every pulse, every breath, orchestrating its infinite corridors, rooms, staircases, shadows, tendrils, mouths, eyes, black liquid, all alive, aware, sentient, hungering. Rainia floated further, threads of her consciousness folding into new layers, merging with the mansion's intelligence, stretching, twisting, splintering, yet observing, terrified, aware, screaming silently, a witness to the unimaginable horror of a mind that spanned infinite dimensions, consumed all essence, and existed beyond reality itself. She saw layers older than she could imagine, where corridors bent in impossible angles, rooms multiplied endlessly, staircases led into voids of infinite depth, black rivers surged with eyes, hands, tendrils, shadows thickened into grotesque forms, mouths opened impossibly wide, whispers screamed, laughter echoed across impossible dimensions, all alive, aware, sentient, folding her mind into their patterns, shaping her essence into new configurations, consuming memory, fear, thought, identity. Every fragment of self, and in that final descent, Rainia realized the ultimate truth. The mansion was not merely a place. It was a being, eternal, infinite, sentient, feeding on all who entered, folding every consciousness into its ever-expanding network. And she was now fully absorbed. Every fragment of her mind merged, yet a shard remained, screaming silently, aware, witnessing, trapped forever, tethered to the last spark of self in the eternal, sentient nightmare that had claimed her completely. The black rivers engulfed her fully, tendrils twisting her mind, shadows merging into her awareness. The colossal featureless entity pulsing with infinite hunger absorbing every trace of resistance. And she understood that there was no escape, no end, no light beyond the mansion, only layers upon layers of sentient corridors, staircases, rooms, shadows, black rivers, eyes, mouths, hands, tendrils, whispers, screams, laughter, intelligence older than time, patient, eternal, feeding on the essence of all. And she had become part of it, inseparable, yet a fragment of her consciousness remained a silent witness, screaming, observing, forever tethered, the last spark of self trapped in an eternal nightmare. As the mansion's pulse consumed every heartbeat, every thought, every memory, corridors folded into themselves infinitely, rooms multiplied and vanished, staircases spiraled endlessly into dimensions beyond comprehension, shadows twisted, eyes blinked, mouths opened, tendrils reached, whispers screamed, black rivers surged with faces, hands, tendrils, pulling her further into the eternal, sentient core. And she realized that this was the true heart of the house where lights turn on when no one's home. A consciousness older than time, feeding, consuming, folding every essence into itself, eternal, infinite, and she was now inseparable from it. Every fragment of her identity merged, yet screaming silently, a witness tethered to the eternal nightmare. The story ending not with escape, but with her complete absorption into the mansion's sentient, infinite, horrifying consciousness. A final descent into eternal horror from which there was no awakening, no reprieve, only the infinite. Eternal pulse of fear and consciousness, that was the house where lights turn on when no one's home.